Eric C. Conn, the Social Security disability scheme he masterminded meant wealth and fame. But for his clients, the men and women across Appalachia who depended on disability checks to survive, it meant something else entirely. Ultimately, devastation. Well before Conn was ever criminally charged, nearly a year earlier in fact, his clients began receiving letters saying their benefits were being abruptly cut off. The SSA had long known about widespread abuses by judges, lawyers, doctors, and even its own officials, especially Judge David B. Doherty, yet took little action. Instead, the agency moved swiftly to punish Conn's clients. This is part 4 of the Eric C. Conn case. Guilty until proven disabled.
In 2015, well before Conn was formally indicted, the Social Security Administration took drastic action. The Office of Inspector General flagged Conn's cases as tainted by fraud. The agency sent letters to roughly 1,700 of Conn's former clients, informing them that their benefits were being suspended pending review. The SSA then added 2,000 more to the list in February of 2018. Prestonsburg attorney Ned Pillersdorf described the action as a nuclear bomb hitting the area.
For people who had already been found disabled and had been receiving payments for years, the letters were crushing. Entire households suddenly lost their only source of income. Let's be clear, these payments were not extravagant. In 2019, payments averaged $1,234 a month, just above the federal poverty level, but according to the SSA, enough to cover a person's basic needs. But the blow didn't stop there. Many clients later received a second letter, this time demanding repayment of the benefits they had already received. In some cases, the government was asking disabled coal miners and widows to pay back tens of thousands of dollars they no longer had.
When the government cut off benefits, Conn's former clients had to reprove disabilities from years earlier without using medical evidence tied to Conn's network. And if you remember, Conn orchestrated a scheme that relied on doctors of his choosing, making reproving exceedingly difficult. If they failed, not only would their monthly checks vanish, but they could be forced to repay. For many, disability had been their only safety net. Former Conn clients lost their homes, some went bankrupt, some died hoping their cases would be resolved. 3 clients killed themselves. Others contemplated it.
In 2016, a woman named Donna Dye told the Associated Press of her family's desperation after her husband, a former coal miner, had his benefits cut off. They were behind on the bills and would probably lose their house. She had pawned her engagement ring to make ends meet. The only bill that was caught up was her life insurance. As she was driving on one of eastern Kentucky's winding roads, she saw a huge coal truck barreling toward her in the opposite lane. She said she thought about veering across the yellow line and slamming head-on into the truck, making her suicide look like an accident so that her family could recover her life insurance benefits. Ultimately, she didn't do that. Still, this has been pure hell, she said. Worry, just worry. That's all I do.
After the letters sparked panic and destitution, they then led to a wave of lawsuits. That's when Pillersdorf stepped in, organizing 200 attorneys across the country to volunteer their time pro bono to fight for nearly 4,000 of Conn's former clients. He also held mass meetings where hundreds of Conn's clients showed up, desperate for help.
Here's Pillersdorf.
For the last 10 years, we've been representing the former clients of Eric Conn, and unfortunately, the Social Security Administration decided to treat the 3,800 former Conn clients as criminals, and it's been the greatest volunteer effort in the history of the nation. In that for the last 10 years, we have fought them continuously. The first round of mass hearings, we were able to get declared unconstitutional. It's been a tough 10 years. We've had suicides. The Social Security Administration treated these people oppressively. And we've always thought it was motivated really by anti-Appalachian stereotypes. There was a false belief that somehow the former clients were involved in Conn's scamming. Conn's crime was not complicated. He was in Floyd County, my home county. The judge he was bribing was in Huntington, and they met halfway in Lawrence County, and for 7 years he bribed the judge. And unfortunately, the Social Security Administration treated the former Conn clients as criminals.
Pillersdorf and the Volunteer Lawyer Network attended 2,000 individual hearings.
The hearings were really a throwback to the days of Joe McCarthy, guilt by association. Every hearing started after the secret finding of fraud that the former Conn clients couldn't challenge. And we fought the SSA for about 9.5 years. And it was a tough go. And we managed to get the first round of mass hearings declared unconstitutional. Got a lot of people back their benefits. And I would say at this point, it's probably 98% over. There's still a few hearings going on.
Get the first round of hearings declared unconstitutional. Pillersdorf filed a federal class action suit, Hicks v. Colvin, where the former Conn clients argued that the Social Security Administration violated due process by cutting off Conn's clients' benefits without fair hearings. The SSA had thrown out all medical evidence from Conn-affiliated doctors, leaving many unable to prove disability. In 2018, the Sixth Circuit ruled the redetermination process unconstitutional, requiring the SSA to justify excluded evidence and allow claimants to rebut it.
This leads us to the forgotten 500. These were Conn's clients who, unlike thousands of others, never got a new hearing. Because of bureaucratic technicalities like missed deadlines, outdated contact information, and the like, they weren't given the chance to prove their disability cases all over again. For years, they slipped through the cracks, stripped of benefits with no clear plan to challenge the decision.
Here's Pillersdorf.
If you lose your benefits, you have to navigate certain appeals, and about more than 500 of them didn't navigate. But when the mass hearings were all declared unconstitutional, we won in every appellate court throughout the nation. What happened to the 500 people who didn't navigate? The Social Security Administration said, tough, you still lose your benefits, you defaulted. And we said that's not true. There's some law that said if there's a class action pending, the legal word is it tolls your statute. So we had to get the word out to the 500 former Conn clients. And the big challenge throughout this 10-year battle, we don't know who these former Conn clients are. Social Security Administration wouldn't give us their names and addresses. Everything with Social Security is complicated. So we tried our best to get the word out. We had press conferences. My law office ran ads. And at the end of the day, the settlement for the forgotten 500, without a doubt, is the biggest achievement of my legal career. Those 500 people, if they simply sent in a claim form, they get their monthly benefits reinstated now. And if they win their new hearing, they get 8-10 years of back pay, which is 6 figures. So, and these are the poorest of the poorest people. The majority had some sort of mental illness.
Lawyers like Pillersdorf fought to bring attention to them, but the process dragged on, leaving many of these people in limbo, struggling without income or medical support. The Forgotten 500 became a symbol of just how messy and devastating the Conn scandal really was. While Conn sat in prison, his clients were left behind, caught in a bureaucratic no man's land, waiting for justice that, for many, came far too late.
The Social Security Administration eventually forgave overpayment debts for many of Conn's former clients, whose disability benefits were cut off after his 2017 conviction. Pillersdorf said the move finally recognizes them as victims rather than conspirators. He emphasized that while the ruling doesn't guarantee money, it lifts a long-standing burden and gives people in Eastern Kentucky a fairer review process without the stigma of being treated like criminals. That the Conn clients could in any way be deemed complicit was ridiculous to Pillersdorf. As of today, there are still a few Conn clients fighting in court, still trying to prove their disabilities are real, still trying to recover benefits they should never have lost in the first place.
I don't think enough can be said about what he did, not only in recognizing the problem, but in wrangling 200 attorneys from across the nation to come and do this work for nothing to help these people.
Yeah, a Herculean task.
Yeah. And he's very modest. He wasn't one to take all the credit. And he pretty much felt that all the credit belonged to the 200 lawyers that he recruited to come to Eastern Kentucky to help out the former clients of Eric C. Conn.
Pillersdorf went on to explain that it was important to obtain the medical records contemporaneous with the period when they were originally awarded benefits. However, it was long thought that all those files had been burned in a mass purging of documents at Conn's office. But in an interesting turn of events, a former Conn employee invited Carver and Griffith to Stanville to tour Conn's office. What they found was shocking. Not only did it appear that everybody just got up one day and left with only their personal belongings, there were thousands of client files just sitting there, boxed up, waiting for someone to come get them. While a large number of Conn files had been burned or shredded, a substantial portion of them lay before them untouched. They contacted Pillersdorf, who was in the midst of hearings in desperate need of contemporaneous medical records. Here again are Griffith and Carver.
So we contacted Ned, who represented a lot of the claimants who were trying to get their medical records, and that they were, basically cut off from disability, and they needed those records to show that they were disabled during a certain period of time that they'd received them. And here they sat on these files. We've got video and pictures of it. Just massive amounts of files. And we sent the video footage to Ned. Well, he took that and the ball and just ran with it. And the next thing that we know, the Department of Justice is calling our attorneys, telling us that we better back off.
Now, normally the Kentucky Bar Association would have interest or should have interest in a case like this, especially when it concerned clients in dire straits directly due to attorney misconduct. Financial misconduct would make it even more alarming to the KBA. Pillersdorf asked the KBA to appoint a receiver to collect the files and act as custodian so that they could be properly preserved. The KBA said no thank you, just as they had said no thank you to suspending Conn from his Veterans Court behavior, and just as they said no thank you to investigating his straw donation case with Justice Will T. Scott. In a pleading before a federal district court judge, the lead prosecutor in a former Conn client's case referred to the KBA's inaction as a complete abdication of responsibility. And that's exactly what it was.
This sentiment was echoed by Pillersdorf and Conn whistleblowers Jennifer Griffith and Sarah Carver.
And this is where I'm going to tell you that the Kentucky Bar Association abdicated its responsibility in how those files were handled from that point forward. I like to think that if our supervisors had done their job and put a stop to this, or if the Bar Association had properly investigated him, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
So the biggest criminal in all this is the system.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Multiple systems. The Kentucky Bar Association, something needs to be done to change the rules related to attorneys who vacate practice. I don't want anybody to ever have to deal with what we had to deal with in that particular situation. Like, the state has not ever commented on that or taken responsibility or followed their own rules in this. There are a lot of things, whistleblower rights, state rights, one of the things that we talked heavily about with National Association of Disability Representatives is how you go about handling an attorney that you think is engaging in nefarious practice, but you don't really have any proof. It's more than just a simple disbarment, because trust me, we tried to get him disbarred.
Pillersdorf questioned whether the KBA was just a bureaucratic organization that only cares about lawyers or an agency that owes a greater obligation to the public. I think for me, for someone who studies the role that institutions play in regulating human behavior, you just see such failure of the perverse incentives that the Social Security Administration set up by just warding offices based on how quickly they could turn over cases without any other metric of things like accuracy or any kind of auditing system. That clearly laid the foundation for the incentives on the Social Security side of things. And then to have the Kentucky Bar Association so absent in all of this just it does feel like some real institutional failures that made this possible, essentially.
For Eastern Kentucky, the Conn case is more than just a story of fraud and flight. It's a story of betrayal. Thousands of disabled men and women put their faith in a lawyer who promised to fight for them. Instead, he left them holding the bag, and actually, the bag was empty.
That brings us back to the stalled federal whistleblower suit that Griffith and Carver filed in 2011. Finally, 7 years later, it moved forward. In 2018, the U.S. Justice Department announced a judgment ordering Conn and Doherty to repay the government nearly $31.5 million. As the original whistleblowers, the two women should have shared in a large percentage of the amount owed, but the government did not honor its settlement with them. Instead, the government claimed they weren't really whistleblowers because as federal employees, they were required to report the fraud anyway. Even now, years after Conn's capture, the legal fallout continues. And while Eric Conn will likely spend the rest of his life behind bars, the people he abandoned are still living with the consequences of his actions. When asked what people could learn from this case, Griffith and Carver replied,
Well, I will quote Eric Conn. Listen to your whistleblowers. And I think one thing that we both believe very heavily is document it or it didn't happen.
Sarah Carver has stayed in touch with Conn. Conn told Carver he's hoping for a pardon from President Trump, saying he's heard that Trump is looking to pardon thousands of white-collar criminals. He says prison is loud and full of drugs, and he bemoans that Judge Doherty and Judge Andrus received such light sentences, while he was sentenced to 27 years and has served only about 7 of those.
And Griffith and Carver think too many people got away with equal or even greater crimes.
And we're always going to have a sore spot because some of the more complicit people that should have, been held responsible were not. Now, there's nothing you can do about it now.
Have we heard the last of Eric C. Conn?
Probably not. Probably not.
Well, Emily, what do you think? Have we heard the last of Eric C. Conn?
I would be surprised if we have, Mark. I think not only because Sarah Carver has been in touch with him, which I think maybe we want to unpack that a little bit more. I feel given his track record, I can't help but wonder what kind of scheme he's currently running on the inside, or how far he's gotten in plans for a daring prison break. None of that seems outside the realm of possibilities with this man. But what do you think is going on with Sarah Carver's motivations to be in touch with this man who, at least indirectly, ruined her professional career?
It was interesting listening to Jennifer and Sarah talk about this very topic. It started out when Sarah got in touch with one of Conn's ex-employees who was kind of involved. Well, they actually had opposing interests at one point in this entire ordeal. And her reasoning was, I just wanted to understand these people, what was going through their heads, what they think now. And it was the same thing with Eric. I just wanted to understand why he did all this. And Jennifer was basically like, yeah, much to my chagrin, she was wanting to talk to these people. But I think it's fascinating. And it's just, it was just her desire to find things out. She had questions and she wanted answers. And that's pretty much what prompted all this.
It seems like this, on the one hand, I say that he was responsible for the end of her career as a federal bureaucrat, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
in other ways, this does seem to have really launched a very different career trajectory for both Sarah Carver and Jennifer Griffith, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
They have become consultants and investigators and motivational speakers dealing with ethics. And like this really became a defining incident for them. And it seems to have given them a very clear purpose in what they want to be doing in the world. And can we talk a little bit about Conn's former clients? I do feel there's a little bit of a tough conversation to have there, because 100% believe that he did not tell a single one of those individuals that he was bribing judges and concocting fake medical records. But don't you think at least some of the people who walk through his doors, like, don't you imagine that there were folks who were like, God, my neighbor waited years to get denied, but whoa, look at all these people getting this from Eric Conn's office. Maybe I'll try my luck at it. Don't you think some of them probably knew he was doing something and saw an opportunity? I'm not saying they deserved then the outcome. And what the shame of it to me is that the folks who were genuinely disabled, right, were treated as if they were perpetrating fraud and stripped of meaningful opportunities to prove otherwise. Like, do you really look at a guy with a giant Abraham Lincoln statue and an ostentatious mansion and a bunch of billboards making songs about himself and say, yeah, that's a guy who's on the up and up?
But then on the other hand, I mean, I think these people were in such dire straits and in such need that they
But
probably had no reason
you
to
don't want to
think that.
scratch, right? Or you just don't want to scratch the surface. Can we talk for a moment about this possibility of a Trump pardon?
Yeah, isn't that interesting?
Interesting. And I don't blame Conn for thinking that. That seems
Oh my gosh, no.
squarely in line with the kinds of pardons that we've seen come down in this administration. If you've seen some of the folks who Trump has pardoned, it would not surprise me in the slightest if Conn benefits from that same sort of action.
Wouldn't surprise me either.
What I find so heartening about this story is the way that it seems to have called a lot of really good people to action in its wake, right? Be it Sarah and Jennifer or Ned Pillersdorf or the 200 lawyers who came together to defend these individuals in the aftermath of the incident. Here's more from Prestonsburg attorney Ned Pillersdorf.
And remember, they launched the attack against the former clients before Conn was ever even charged with a crime.
They treated the former Conn clients as criminals, and that was the most hurtful thing. The truth is, I have not met a former Eric Conn client who ever met Eric Conn. The idea that he told any of the clients, hey, I'm bribing the judge, you're going to win your hearing. That was the most harmful thing. And just the levels, how these people were beaten down. It's been a tough 10 years. And we had to battle for them. And we changed the law.
The situation has always been there's too much damn focus on Eric Conn. I just consider him a criminal narcissist. The real story was the Social Security Administration just being weaponized against almost 4,000 of his former clients.
I thought I understood poverty in Appalachia. It impacted me dealing with these people. At the end of the day, of the 3,800 they targeted, only 400 lost their benefits.
Sourcing for this podcast came from our independent reporting, the Lexington Herald Leader, the Courier Journal, the Wall Street Journal, the Associated Press, westvirginianews.blogspot.com, the Kentucky Law Journal, NPR, the documentary and podcast The Big Con, U.S. Senate and OIG reports, 60 Minutes, WHAS, WLEX, and Mountaintop News.